Let's talk about guns. We talked about guns a little bit in the aftermath of the incident at Fort Lauderdale Airport over the weekend on yesterday's show. I want to talk about this horrible reality that, on the one hand, the U.S. continues to be riddled with gun crime. On the other hand, there are other countries, developed countries, first world countries, that are not having gun crime issues. For example, Japan, which has one of the lowest rates of gun crime in the world. Now, to talk about the raw numbers, in 2014, Japan had, this is not a typo, this is not me misspeaking, six gun deaths compared to, this is sad, 33,599 in the United States. Now, before we go further, I know people will say, David, Japan and the US have different populations, so we need to be looking at the rate. Well, Pat, let's do that. Let's look at the rate of gun crime. Of course, 33,599 gun deaths in the US with a population in 2014 of just under 319 million. Japan with six. That's 0.00006. Just putting in some zero placeholders there. 6 gun deaths with a population of 127 million. That means that the gun death rate in the United States is 2,500, not 2.5, not 25, not 250, but 2,500 times higher than in Japan. Well, how easy is it to get a gun in Japan? You can get a gun, but how easy is it? Well, let's look at the requirements to get a gun in Japan. You need to attend an all-day class. You need to then take a written exam. You need to pass a shooting range test with a score of at least 95%. You have to undergo a mental health evaluation, a drug test, a criminal record check. Police will then look into whether you have any links to extremist groups, and then police may even check into the links to extremist groups of your relatives and your colleagues. And then once you pass all of that, handguns are banned, only shotguns and rifles are allowed. The number of gun stores per precinct, per area is limited. You can't have an unlimited supply of ammunition. When you finish, you have to bring back used cartridges in order to get more ammunition. But there's something else which Japanese viewers who sent this story to me were telling me about. Japanese society, particularly in Tokyo, puts huge pressure on conformity and self-control. One need only visit a subway station in Tokyo to very quickly realize the importance of self-control and organization in Japan. Committing an act of violence in Japan would almost be seen as bringing shame upon the perpetrator and even their family. There's this, somebody I know told me about this red tag system where in Japan you have to recycle in a particular way. Certain types of trash and recycling go in different bins. If you misplace your recycling, Rachel, this is going to blow your mind. The company that comes to pick up the trash and recycling will red tag the bin, which basically publicly says to anybody that goes by your bins, this person is not recycling correctly. And that is considered to bring shame. It would be embarrassing if that happens. That tells us a lot. The culture around guns in Japan tells us a lot about what is going right there and what is going wrong in the U.S.
It does. I think it also might have started in World War II when they were the only ones who were a victim of a nuclear attack, and I think that made them have kind of a more sensitive approach to violence in general.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't consider that. And I mean, there are a number of contrasts in addition to that. For example, Pat, contrast if you look at the gun culture in the U.S., not only is gun culture in the U.S. very different than in Japan for political reasons, but you have, when somebody uses a gun to kill someone else, right? Almost no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how depraved or insane, you will have some defenders. Now, yes, if it's a 10 out of 10 in terms of insanity of how you used a gun to kill someone, you would probably have few defenders. But even in the case of what we might rank as an 8 out of 10 in how insane your use of a gun was to kill someone, you will have defenders in the United States. And that is a significant contrast to what you see in Japan when people use guns to kill people.
Yeah, and part of that does have to do with Japanese culture, but it also has to do with their restrictions and regulations being a lot more rigorous than what
Sure.
we have here. And when you look at that list, I mean, some of them may not be so much in keeping with the American tradition. I don't think a lot of people are going to get behind a written test to obtain a weapon.
Why not,
But
though?
so much of them are reasonable.
You have to do a written test. I mean, I guess it's on a computer now, but it's still written, just not on paper. If you're going to drive, right? And cars have a purpose. You could run someone over with a car or a truck, as we're increasingly seeing in terrorist incidents, but you might just use a car for transportation, and you still have to have a written test. Why does it not make sense to have a written test for gun ownership in this country?
It doesn't make sense because if you think about the immediacy of how a car can kill someone, it's very similar to a gun. But another point about the gun laws there is that if you're a perpetrator of gun violence, you're not just committing one crime, you're committing three: for owning the gun, for owning the bullets, and for firing the gun. So even at that basic level, you're in a worse position in terms of the law.
You're saying in Japan?
Yep.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, assuming that you have one of the guns that's not allowed, right?
Yes.
Because handguns are not allowed.
Yes.
And yes, you have limits on ammunition. And of course, if police figure out you had way more ammunition than what you were allowed, there's a number of factors here. And, people will hear us, Pat, and they'll say, you guys are the gun grabbers like Obama, who, by the way, grabbed no guns, more guns purchased under President Obama than arguably any president in history. But this is just about common sense.
Or they'll point out and say, well, because they don't have many guns, I'm sure there's mass stabbings all over the place in Japan. There is one you can point to in July of last year where someone stabbed, I think, 19 people. But that was the biggest mass act of violence since World War II in that country. It was just the anomaly.
Not to mention, by the way, that mass stabbings leave far fewer people dead than mass shootings, as we know. Okay, let's pause there. We're going to take a break. I will talk to Joel Whitney next. Make sure to give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
Gamefly is sort of like Netflix for video games. They have over 8,000 new and classic games for Xbox One, Xbox 360, PS4, PS3, Wii, and a bunch of other platforms. And you can play as many games as you want for one monthly fee. And if you find some games you want to keep, you can buy them for a low used price. There's never any due dates or late fees. And our audience can get a free 30-day trial at gameflyoffer.com/TDPS. The games are shipped directly to you with return envelopes included. There's no contracts, and you can rent games through the mobile app. Get the free 30-day trial for the David Pakman Show audience and support our show by going to gameflyoffer.com/TDPS.